Good morning to everybody. Stefano Mazzarino Geopolitics from Italy. I'm just returned back from South America. So the guest of today is Iryna Matviyishyn. Sorry for my bad pronunciation. She is a journalist covering war and human rights, a video reporter for Kyiv Independent, and she's a contributor to NPR, Times Radio, BBC, and many others. So the idea of today is like to make a little bit a stream that it's more like chatting, a small interview to Iryna about the actual situation and what is the feeling of a Ukrainian journalist. I already hosted another Ukrainian journalist from the channel Adin Plus Adin, Iryna Tozia, so from Kiev also. And let's say the thanks at the beginning for your presence. It's important for me to show real voices from Ukraine. So Iryna, just to begin, tell me like what is the actual situation and what is like the life condition in Ukraine, like in the city where you're based or the news that you have, because I have many news, but from mainstream and only from my friends, but they are mainly from Kiev. So not other news from for example, Odessa. We just received many news that it was attacked the power grid, so it was shut off, and the first news is that it will take, I don't know, 1 month, 2 months to recover the power grid in Odessa. And for the people who doesn't know nothing about the Ukrainian geography, Odessa is very important, and it's actually the only big port that is available for the Ukrainian actual state. So, Iryna, just give us some impression, and then I will collect the question from the people, and I will give it to you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. It was very difficult to arrange time since I'm constantly moving either around Ukraine or abroad. Just a disclaimer that right now I'm in Seville, in Spain, for almost a week, and I will go back to Ukraine the day after tomorrow. So I'm not currently in Ukraine, but obviously I know the situation since I've been there all the time before. And I went to Kherson, I went to Kyiv, Mykolaiv, and I myself am from Lviv, so I'm based in Lviv during the war. And the situation, like since the recent strikes, is basically the same, and in some cities even worse, because almost all critical infrastructure in some cities was damaged. So a lot of power plants that provide electricity to big cities are destroyed, and it's really hard to balance between electricity supply, which is vital for some sectors of life, to crucial like institutions like hospitals or some other vital centers, and to normal people who live just like in big apartment blocks and who also need to have heating and water, especially now when it got very cold and it was snowing in Kyiv and in Lviv too. I saw at some point the temperature was minus 19 at night. I guess it was in Kyiv a week ago. So we can imagine what happens to these apartment buildings and in what conditions people live if there's no electricity and thus there's no heating, and in some places there's no water too. So the life is not easy, but what I can say from what I've seen in all the cities I've visited is that people are tired. Some people are tired of this, and of course it's exhausting to live like trying to arrange your life with no plan. Like you basically have to manage your life day by day, and to predict what will happen like in a few hours, whether you will have electricity or not, whether you will be able like to go to the supermarket, or when you have to set a washing machine or things like this. So it's very tiring, of course, but at the same time, the resolve of Ukrainian people remains very high, and in no way it undermines the determination of people against Russia, like in their fight against Russia. So even in Kherson, like after the liberation, the situation has been difficult for weeks. Like they didn't have electricity, water, or heating, and it gets dark at 4 p.m. So like life there was very hard, and to that the shelling added because Russians are on the left bank, so they kept shelling the city. But people were so happy to live freely finally, that they are willing to endure all this. And they said that for us the most important thing is to be free and to live, to be back under Ukraine. That lack of water, power, or other goods is something that they can live through. But you can't live under constant pressure of occupiers and with the knowledge that you can be killed for nothing. So, but it's definitely a very difficult winter. One of my friends is in Odessa working, and Odessa is in total blackout. Obviously, it's not easy, and I think a lot of people do not imagine what it is like. Like me myself, I also haven't thought before all this that such basic services like power supply is something that you are very dependent on, and that can actually shape your daily life in a very crucial ways. Like life without electricity is not the same, because work depends on it, your daily routines, your basic needs, everything depends on it. And me myself, I live with my parents near Lviv, so it's like countryside area where I usually stay when in Lviv. But when I was in Kyiv, I stayed in an apartment, and I understood that like I only were there for 2 days, and it was already very hard without electricity. And I was thinking about vulnerable groups of people, like old people, families with kids, with babies, who live on upper floors and who have like to do everything like without these basic needs. And when there's no elevator, like everything becomes complicated. So obviously it's not easy, but Ukrainians are determined to go through this if they know that it takes like sacrifice to have to finally come to victory after this winter.
No, it's just to confirm your testimony. Like I just received like this message from my friend Iryna Goulet from Adin channel, like in Kiev. Like she said to me yesterday, like it's cold, it's dark, and there is no electricity. I feel myself like in London in 1941. So it's and imagine that I hosted her and her producer in Italy like for 4 or 5 days, 20 days ago, and they had a little bit of trip like to rest between the war, and for me was very shocking, for example, that they were not used to listen the commercial planes. So they were afraid about the sound of the commercial planes in Italy, or any type of sounds like little fireworks in Naples. So this is something that the Westerners don't understand about the sense of permanent fear of something in your daily routine. Not only like the thing that you said about that you have to plan your days without knowing the electricity, the light, or whatever, but the fear of I don't know, one shelling or whatever.
This I already don't mention because it's just part of our life now, and it's been ongoing for 9 months. So for us, it's already like the new normal, and even though it's not normal. So I don't even like talk about it because to me it's kind of obvious. But for example, here I'm in Spain, and I often heard some like very loud sounds, and it like triggers me because like in my head and in every brain of a Ukrainian, it's like loud sounds like which resemble explosions are about danger, and that's why one of the reasons why I don't want to stay in Europe for Christmas or the New Year's, because I know that it won't be cheerful. It won't be like fun. I would just be triggered by all those sounds. And I see that in Europe, the Christmas spirit is like usual. And I suggest that all these fireworks and celebrations will not be more quiet. So I prefer to go back to Ukraine, where life is like adapted to our realities, and it's just like I don't know. It's as I've said, it's not normal, but I think it's foreigners cannot, like those people who have not lived in Ukraine cannot really understand that like simple sounds can trigger too, and maybe it's for better.
Yeah, let's hope. I know that it's something naive, but also yesterday I was in Bogota. I went like for Eucharistia, like to the church. I made a prayer like for the peace every time that I can. I do it. But what I wanted to ask you, like about the actual situation. First, there is the news of today that. It's very interesting. I put it on the screen for the people that the Belarusian support for Russia's war in Ukraine is slightly degrading the Belarusian military material capacity to conduct a conventional military operation or on its own. Connected to this one, like Lukashenko support for Russia war in Ukraine and Russian pressure on Belarus to join the fighting are likely causing friction within the Belarusian military. From the source that we had, it's from Institute of, let's say, the Institute of Study of War and other sources. The main problem is that the Belarusian let's say regular forces are not so good. It's like they are good in the anti-riots for the control of the cities, and we don't know, but the impression that we have, this is why I want to ask your opinion, it's that the Russians are using Belarus like to maintain a pressure on the north of Kiev, so the Ukrainians are not able to concentrate completely on the east and the south if I have a pressure from Belarus. What is your opinion?
Sorry, I don't hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me now, Iryna? Can you hear me now, Iryna? Okay, let me try now. Now, can you hear me? Okay, let me try. Stay where I go out and return back. Okay, now can you hear me, Iryna? Can you hear me? I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Iryna? Okay, let me check the stream if we are okay or not. Okay, we lost Iryna. Let me check. Okay, so she had some problems because the audio was working, and let's say my opinion about the actual situation just before Iryna is returning back, it's that Russians are a little bit in a stalemate in the east, and there is a condition that probably will change with other people that will come with the mobilization. Charles, can you hear me? Because if you have any question, just put all the public. Just put the question because we are waiting that Iryna will reconnect. And my impression also of what I heard in Central and South America, it's that the perception of the war, especially from the Latin America, it's very far away. So they don't feel a lot what is happening. And let's see only if we are able to get Iryna, because the problem is that, okay. Okay, so perfect. Returning back to the actual situation, let's put a little bit the some slides. Okay, Iryna is not, and I don't see you. Okay, but the main problem about this map that we already looked at was like probably the project number A of the Russian government, like to create two states, let's say one vessel state in the western Ukraine and Novorossiya in the southern part. If you can check it, the main objective was also to reconnect Russia to Transnistria and to completely isolate Ukraine from the Black Sea. So the main thing is that it was very, very difficult to achieve these results, especially with the forces that the Russian put it on the ground. We have to remember that Ukraine is still the biggest state in Europe geographically, and to take the control of this land, the forces that the Russian put it on the ground was completely not sufficient. So the main point that I can put about the update of today is that the Institute of Study of War said very interesting things about the actual situation. About let's say that is the Russian Minister of Defense denied rumors on December 11th that the General Valery Gerasimov resigned or was removed. So it was not okay. Maybe Iryna here.
Sorry.
No problem, Iryna. So I was,
Something happened. I don't know what happened, but I had to connect
but
to my.
I can hear you now. Perfect. I was
Okay.
trying to chat a little bit, but only to put the map so you can see what I wanted to show. Um, I showed like the plan A probably of the Russians was to, let's say, create a vassal state on the western Ukraine, completely disconnected to the Azov and to the Black Sea, and like, let's say, with this type of connection. And this was, for example, one image of Russian propaganda. And the main problem was that in this continuously Russian propaganda about the connection of, for example, your part, your cities that could be annexed to Poland. They continue to say this thing that it's like completely fake. Or the main thing that the forces used militarily at the first site was completely not sufficient in an operation or in a war to conquer the biggest state in Europe, that is Ukraine. I think that the Western states were completely, let's say, surprised by the braveness of the Ukrainian military, and but with a high cost of lives, and so like a question that I want to say to you. I already put it with this question to all my, let's say, Ukrainian guests. In your opinion, let's say that tomorrow we can make a deal to close the war. And what could be a deal that is acceptable for the Ukrainian people? I will make something a proposal. Let's say a proposal. Why? Because in Italy we have a case that it's interesting, but it's very similar to the case of Donbass. But it's Trentino Alto Adige. It's I don't know if you know it. It's two provinces in the northeast that
Yeah.
were historically, for the people who doesn't know, before the First World War, where this part of Italy was part of Austria, and so these people, it's like German speaking, Latin speaking, whatever. And so after the Second World War, there was a huge movement of internal terrorists, not like in Eastern Ukraine, but a little bit. So the agreement that was made about these two provinces was that they are, let's say, part of Italy, but they are autonomous in the taxes, let's say something like this. And they have like bilingualism that is guaranteed in the school, whatever you want. Plus, the interesting thing is that there is a declaration of a United States where Austria is like the observer internationally that guarantee the, let's say, the language autonomy of these provinces. From the first part of the war, I tried to say this example that for me was very interesting, like to maintain, let's say, the Ukrainian, let's say, sovereignty territorially, but one solution that could be applicable to the eastern part of Ukraine. What is your opinion? What is acceptable for the Ukrainians? Is acceptable, for example, in exchange of a peace, some territorial ceding to the Russian? I already know that it's no, but I'm asking to you. And the second thing, what could be an agreement for a peace, in your opinion, that is like acceptable, but from both parts?
Well, as you've already said, I don't see any peaceful solutions to this conflict war, except Russia withdrawing fully from Ukraine. The thing is that these kind of like options were being discussed before the full-scale invasion, and
some parts of society were kind of advocating for these peaceful solutions with some successions of territory to Russia, thinking that a federalization could save Ukraine and help prevent further conflicts. But this turned out not to be true, and I was one of the people who didn't believe in that and who was advocating against that too. The problem is that Russia is an imperialist state, and it doesn't see itself, it sees itself as an empire, but empire is impossible without Ukraine. And that's been said numerous times throughout the history, that Ukraine, because for Russia, Ukraine is crucial historically. Without Ukraine, Russia would not exist, because the Kievan Rus was born on these territories, and it has like a almost sacred meaning for Russia. So giving just part of the territories, especially in the east, has no, like, it has some benefits territorially, but the rest of Ukraine is more crucial for Russia as an empire. That's why.
I know, Irina. It's like what you said. It's completely what Brzezinski said in the great chessboard, that without Ukraine, Russia is not an empire.
Yeah.
But with Ukraine, it's an empire. So it's but this, and also in a lot of public declaration of Alexander Dugin is said the same, that the main problem it's in my opinion, I have a different opinion, because I think that the Russians got a lot of problems more geopolitically after the especially military operation war in Ukraine, whatever, because with probably agreement of Finland and Sweden inside NATO, the bigger border with NATO will be Finland, but it's about 800 kilometers. So, and it's very difficult to protect it. And I didn't know that to go to the Kola Peninsula, like to Murmansk, there is only one highway that is going next to the border. So let's say that in a defense situation, to protect the border of Ukraine, it's much easier than with Finland. So I don't know if the gain that they got with this war, it's something that it was worth. In my opinion, it's like and I want to know what you think. It's like the last move of the tail, let's say, of an empire that act like as an empire, but actually it's not. It's a former empire, because Russian Federation is not Soviet Union, is not the power of the Soviet Union, and especially now it's a regional power. It's not a world power. It's the Russian GDP is less than Italy, for example. And it's 1/15 of US GDP. The military spending of Russia, it's, I don't know, less than 1/20th of US GDP, or 1/10th of the Chinese spending. So I'm, but in another hand, what I want to ask to you, because I study in Russia, I have a lot of friends also in Russia and Ukraine, whatever. I think that the Westerners don't understand that the Slavic people, let's say also Ukrainian, I can mix a little bit in this thing, Ukrainian and Russian, you are very able to survive. We are not. Like, let's say, but unfortunately, there is a war between, let's say, Europe and Ukraine. For sure, we will lost, because we are not able to. And you know what I'm saying? It's like there is some, let's say, similarity between the Ukrainian and the Russian people, that you don't need the last iPhone. You can concentrate on the survival. let's say also the Italian people don't know what is the revenue, so it's like you are able to provide your things also without going to grocery. Like in the West, it's something that the people forgot in the last 40 years.
I mean, we are trained by history, since we've lived through a lot of turbulent periods, and life was never easy, except the last maybe few years. But yeah, so we are kind of like, we have it in the genetics, like the mode of survival. Maybe that's why. But what I wanted to say about imperialism is, of course, it's not an empire in a classical understanding now, but Russia has always seen itself as an empire. And even if you listen to their propaganda for domestic audience, not for foreigners, because the narratives are different, their language, like some of their top propagandists, like Simonian, they are using super imperial language, and they are even using the language from this kind of like very old style Russian language that used to be like the language of, I don't know, Pushkin, Lermontov, and Tolstoy. But with this language, she constantly mentions Ukrainians as brothers, and she speaks about like how cool it would be to reunite again and sing Ukrainian songs. But like everything they say is like so imperialist, that when I read her tweets or like, I don't know, Telegram posts, I feel like I'm reading some, I don't know, writer from the
100 years ago.
20th century, exactly.
No, but it's interesting, Irina, because I am, well, let's say that I'm not fluent in Russian, but I can understand mainly everything, the context, not all the words, but I'm trying to watching a little bit of Russian propaganda. Sometimes is unwatchable, but I'm trying to watch. And there is an interesting website that is called Russian Media Monitor on YouTube, with for the English speaker, with some parts of Russian propaganda translated with subtitles in English. It's very interesting if you want to watch. What I'm not able to understand, it's like the way how they let's say for example present the Ukrainians. For example, I was in Russia many times in the last years, and let's say that the normal television for the normal people was drawing the Ukrainians as Nazisti, Banderisti, blah blah blah, for 8 years, blah blah blah, killing the children, and I mean, it's something that was for sure a propaganda for prepare the people for the war, but was not connected completely to the reality, because for sure in a war there is, let's say, nobody is a saint in a war. But what I don't understand, for example, they said that we can nuke United Kingdom and make disappear the England in 10 minutes, something like this, or Simonian said that everybody will have to go to heaven at the end, so we can use nukes. So it's I don't know. For me, it's unbelievable. It's impossible to listen to the Italian television, for example, something like this. And imagine that I live in Brescia, and next to my city, that it's in the northeast, there is a NATO base with 50 nuclear bombs. So it's air to ground, and it's like a deterrence. But I never heard we will bomb Moscow in 10 minutes and Russia disappeared. So it's something that in the communication, it's very shocking for me. And so
Shocking, and it's incomprehensible, but that's like a typical strategy of the authoritarian state that is like on the brink of survival, because Russia is like, it hasn't done anything for its people. Like, they don't not only hate Ukrainians, they themselves do not do anything to make life better in Russia. So the only way to save the country when you don't do anything for the country actually is to create an external enemy. And when you have the biggest problems inside and you don't want to deal with them, you just create another problem. And actually this strategy has been like in place for a very long time, since like when Putin came, it was one of the main tactics how he remained in power. When there was a problem, he was just creating another one, and wars were just part of this strategy. The war in Chechnya, the war in Georgia, they were always distracting people from what was happening inside the country, and were actually aimed at mobilizing people against the external imaginary enemy. And that worked, and it worked for years, for decades, and even hundreds years ago. So it's, on one hand it's bizarre, but on the other hand it has like a logical explanation, which was also confirmed by many analysts and historians.
I just received one comment that it's like from one viewer that is like, that's not true. Sorry, Russia with Putin it's much better of Russia before Putin. Blah blah blah. The living standards are much higher. In this thing, okay, I have to say that technically, like the standard of living of Russian during the Putin, let's say, government had a huge increase, but it started from very low. So, in my
Yeah, but
opinion, no, but with the state that owned 30% of all the commodities of the world, and it has only the 3% of the population, the level of let's say GDP per capita, it's still very low. So I think the perception of the Russians I went in many places, not in the Far East, but I went in Bashkiria, Ufa, I went in Sochi, Moscow, around Moscow, blah blah blah. I think that we can divide Russia technically in two main parts: Moscow and Peter. But it's like, I don't know. You can compare Moscow with New York or Shanghai or whatever. It's not even Russia, and the rest of Russia. The standard living of the rest of Russia and also the salaries are 3-4 times less. So, but I can agree with you, Iryna, in what you said about the permanent tension to create an enemy. I think that also US have the same things, because also US is
but
an empire.
what I want to say, I'm not going to talk about Russia because I'm not an expert on Russia, and I've just been there one time. But what I want to say, we can't compare life before. We can say that life under Putin became much better just because it was life under Putin. It was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union, we transitioned to capitalism, which was clear that life became better already by the standard of living. It was the same in Ukraine. We didn't have the best government. Like, our governments were always corrupt, but life was improving years by years. And it was not because we had, I don't know, a post-communist president, or a dictator, like a becoming dictator as a president. It was because we transitioned to capitalism, and people were using this opportunity to make their life better, and it worked. What I wanted to say, if life under Russia, under Putin, was much better, they would not be looting all the stuff from Ukrainian houses everywhere they came, and that's not an exceptional case. It didn't only happen in Bucha or just in the Kyiv region. It happened everywhere. The Russians came. They didn't only loot big things like, I don't know, equipment from factories or some enterprises, or cars, firefighting cars, buses and everything, but they looted just homes. And people in Kherson region told me that they even looted clothes, underwear, boots, which is like the whole tanks were loaded with that, and Russian soldiers were just lying on this stuff, not to lose anything, because they were so greedy about taking all this stuff home. If you come from a country where you at least have basic needs satisfied, and where you can allow yourself to have a toilet, you would not loot this toilet from a country where you came to fight. That's just and that's why
I agree, Irina. I agree completely with you, but I think that the strategy of mobilization, especially in the first part of the war, was to keep quiet Moscow and Peter. So the Russian took a lot of forces from Far East, Buryatia, whatever, and for sure, like the average salary in the Far East, it's about $200-300 a month. In Moscow, it's over 1,000. So and now, okay, the money calculation it's wrong because the ruble change it's fake, so it's something that I cannot do now. What I wanted to show you, it's like this one, that it's interesting. That was like the referendum in 1991, and only for because I received one question, that is this one: what is the difference between Ukraine fight for independence from Russia and Donbass people fight for independence from Ukraine? What I can put in this question, it's very interesting. What was the results of the referendum for the independence of Ukraine from the Soviet Union? And we can see that also Lugansk and Donetsk had over 80% of the people that wanted to have the Ukrainian independent. The only, let's say, majority Russian oblast completely, that was Crimea, and Crimea and also Sevastopol was over 50%. You can see that the people that were against were in the east 10, 12, 13%. In Crimea, that was the most Russian, let's say, dominating group present, was against the independence, was still the minority, 42%. So what is, Irina, your opinion, let's say, of how it started, this thing of the Donbass, why they wanted this independence, and the final thing, and then I collect some questions just to give it to you and close. Why, in your opinion, it was not possible to make works the Minsk agreements?
Well, about Donbass, the first thing is that the history of Donbass is very tragic and complex, and things that the thing is that Russia used the outcomes of this history for its benefit to create this propaganda narrative that Donbass is pro-Russian. But in fact, if you go to villages, and like even if you talk to some old people in Donbass, they will, and just the history of Donbass, as I've said, is very tragic, because it was aimed at erasing Ukrainian identity from the region, and everything was done for the past 100 years to do so, even under the Ukrainian government already after the Soviet Union collapsed. The policy was such that they played on divisions, and a lot of people in the rest of Ukraine had the stereotype that Donbass was pro-Russian, and they were Russian speakers, which, by the way, this narrative was debunked by Putin's war itself, because when we've got millions of IDPs, we saw that these people were pro-Ukrainian, and they were Ukrainian speaking as well. Not all of them, but of course, like a big part of them used Ukrainian in their daily language too. So that's why they voted for the independence, because like Russia was not able to completely destroy the identity. The other question about Minsk agreements, with the full-scale invasion, it became clear that it was a procrastination of a bigger war. it was clear to some people even before that, because the Minsk agreement basically didn't allow Ukraine to respond to fire coming from Russia and not to move, not to push Russians back. So it was basically not endorsing, but giving Russia green light to stay in the occupied territories and to move forward. And it was just silly, like especially now with the retrospective that we have. And we, like anyone you ask right now, if there is a chance of this kind of agreement to be put back in place, that's just impossible, because everyone realizes that to what it leads. So yeah.
Okay. I'm collecting the last question just to stay into the hour, but the actual situation that I saw on the front is that it seems that Russians with the Wagner group are concentrating a lot of the fights around Bakhmut. And for me, it's very strange, because Bakhmut, it's like, it could be important for the propaganda, but not for the invasion of the Russian, because after there is Siversk and whatever, there is a lot of fortified Ukrainian zones. So Bakhmut, it could be a Pyrrhic victory, let's say. So this is what I don't understand. What I'm seeing, that it's an interesting but sad analysis, is that from the first round of the Russian mobilization, the second I'm saying, the first round was sent immediately to the front in Donetsk. And there is an analysis of the last 2-3 days, a Western analysis. How was the life expectancy of the Russians on the front on the first round? And it was only 21 days. So but it's a disaster, because I know that it's very sad to think about it, but both fronts, we have let's say young people that in the part of Ukraine is defending the country, but probably the most of the part of the Russian forces are forced to go. They're not happy to go to the front. And to think that when they were deployed on the front, after 20 days they were died, for me is something very shocking. And but I see also the interesting thing that in the south there is a lot of attacks and counteroffensive of Ukrainians, Melitopol, Zaporizhia Oblast, and whatever. And so about this part of the world, my question is, and I have the last question from the public, is how do you believe that the last attacks that Ukrainians are doing in the Russian soil, let's say not officially because it's not declared, with the drones on the Russian soil, could be affecting the Russian morale? Because if I was Russian and I had an attack 200 kilometers from Moscow, I think, imagine that you are an empire and you are attacked on your soil. It's not very good to show to your people. What do you think?
Yeah, well, about the result, like the effect of these attacks, I think that it will just, well, I'm not against these attacks, because as many Ukrainians, I want at least these people to understand what it's like to be bombed, like when there's an attack on your country. I'm aware that Ukraine will never be able to launch a large attack on Russia or anything like this, and I'm not a warmonger in that sense. But I think the main goal of these attacks is to show that they are not immune to anything. And the other thing is just like ordinary people's sentiment that Russia brought so much suffering to Ukraine on so many levels that Ukrainians want Russians to actually see at least like a small bit of what it's like to be in a country which is constantly under attacks. I'm sure that there's some kind of strategical goal, like a strategical purpose behind it, because they are targeting strategic facilities. And I'm just not good at military assessment of military targets and what are they are targeting and
No
what.
problem, Iryna, but it's okay.
But
This, I have two other questions that could be interesting. Charles K, that is from China. What are your thoughts on China and the position of Asia and the rest of the world about the war?
China is maneuvering between Russia and Ukraine as always, and it's clear why they don't want to spoil relations with Russia. But at the same time, China is very careful with Putin because they have like their own issues, and in some senses, Putin is not the wisest man in geopolitics right now. So they are trying to keep the good relations with Russia, but they're also trying to show that they are against one country threatening the other country with nuclear weapon and doing anything that it wants. Also because China is also a superpower and Russia used to be considered as a superpower. So that's why. I mean, to me, I don't expect much from China. I mean, it's an imperial, it has like some kind of imperial mindset too. So.
But Iryna, with China, in my opinion, it because I went in China 4 times, and I think that China government is much wiser than the Russians, and we're not helping Russian because they are friends, but because they can have a super advantage in buying commodities for discount, same as India. For example, India now is supplying Boeing and Airbus parts because Russia has not access for the plane, not normal plane, commercial, not military, but only because they have commercial benefit, not because they are friends of Russia.
Yeah.
So the main thing that I want to make a provocation for you, and it's something that I report on this channel every time. I think that if we look to the normal, let's say, heritage of the Soviet era of the pipelines, I think that 80% of the oil and gas of Russia was exported to Europe, about 155 billion cubic meters. And actually, if you see, there is one pipe that is going directly to Italy, passing through Ukraine, and then there is Slovakia, Austria, and Italy. Actually, from the last 2 weeks is the first time from 1974 that Italy is not buying gas from Russia. And imagine that Italy was the second best client of Russia after Germany. So what could be changed? I think that if you see Italy, it's becoming the new platform for the import of the gas from the Mediterranean that we didn't use yet a lot. So from Africa, from Cyprus, from Azerbaijan. So we are exchanging the supplier from east to south. But the problem for Russia is that if they want to export to east, they can, but it's long term because the upgrade of the power of Siberia 2, that it's like the pipeline to China, it will be ready in 2028. So I think in 5 years, I don't know if the Russian Federation will exist anymore, if the condition will stay like this one. This is for me why I think that also Russians need an exit strategy, because economically, the war in Ukraine, it's becoming too expensive, too long, and now the Russians are able to maintain a little bit of stability in their own economy, but from January and February, the recession will be definitive. Now, Russia is already minus 5% of GDP. I think that when the people will feel, the Russian people, that the level of life can be decreasing from the first time from 1991, from the 90, let's say after the 90s, because also the 90s in Russia was very bad. But I think that the effect will be very devastating on the, let's say, the level of satisfaction of the people of the government. The question that I have is the last two. Okay, do you think that the war have happened if Putin wasn't the leader of Russia?
What have happened? If Putin has not been the leader of Russia for the past decades, maybe, like if they had some democratic alternatives and if they had an actual democracy, because the transition of power in Russia has never been democratically. It was presented as such, but in fact, it was just like a simulation of transition of democratic tradition. I think that, and in that case, it would not have happened. I don't know what happened to Putin. Maybe I think he really something really. But on one hand, I cannot understand, because I think as a human being who has some kind of rational judgment, but at the same time, I understand that he's a former KGB and he's a typical Russian from that system. So it's kind of logical that he would have resorted to this kind of imperial conquest. But if we take Medvedev, like if it would be Medvedev, let's say, I don't think he would go that far. Maybe but we see he's completely nuts now. But maybe back then he would act different.
But I don't know, because Medvedev, in my point of view as Westerner, is acting like a bad guy. So actually, like in Twitter, but if we remember when he was like president, it was like very moderate at that time. So what it's like unpredictable for me, it's first, I don't think that Russians are prepared for a democratic process, because the people, let's say, I think that the big difference between Ukrainian and Russian is like that in the last 30 years, the Ukrainians, let's say, traveled more. They had a little bit of contamination of the mindset. You are left Soviet minded than the Russians.
But I will say,
my opinion.
It's not only that we traveled more. It's been historically like that. We've never invaded other countries, and we've never been a colonizer. Throughout the history, for hundreds of years, Ukrainians were fighting, we speak about Ukrainians, not like Kyiv and Rus or anything.
Mm-hmm.
We've been fighting against tyranny and against occupation. And we have that, I don't know if you are aware, but Ukrainians often say that they are of the Cossack heritage, and that's something that they very often refer to when we speak about identity. And the main idea of Cossacks was fighting for freedom, against the power that was trying to take control over them. And this was like a fight for life and a fight to death. So they were willing.
No, but Iryna, there is very interesting histories in also in the Russian Empire. It's like something that people outside of the former Soviet Union don't know about, like Pugachev or Salavat Yuliyev, because I went many times in Bashkiria, but people don't know about the protest of this ethnical group of Bashkirian in Russian Federation. But it was like completely, let's say, cut in the blood by Catherine the Great.
If we speak about Russia, and there's like, if we speak about Russia as a federation with different ethnic nations, I'm sure these nations at some point will try to separate from Russia. Let's say with the current pace of the events that we have, some will try to regain their freedom. And as we speak about Russians as they say, traditional Russians who live in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other parts that are not like in majority of different ethnicity. I don't think they don't have any democratical tradition in their past, and I don't think it will change anytime soon. All the analysts I've been listening to say that we should not put much hope into that. We can put hope into Russia collapsing into different small states, as you've said, like with the help of those ethnic minorities. But I'm not sure if anything will change in Moscow itself. They've never been under democratic rule. They don't see freedom as a value.
This is why when I was talking with friends in Russia, let's say people that lived both in Soviet era and in new Russian era, and I was questioning about why the Russians are so, let's say, in love with one man in power, no? Like one big powered man and nothing else, only the president. And they said to me what you said in advance, that they were afraid of the collapse of the federation. So it's better in their point of view to have one very big power what like the people is afraid also of, instead of having a democratic system that could force the federation to collapse, especially because like the Russian core, it's all around Moscow and Peter. Like 75% of the Russian population, it's before Urals. In the east, there is very few. It's like less than 25% of all the Russian. It's after the Urals. Last question for you. So, if on the February 24th, Russia decided to commit to peace at all cost, what will be the repercussion to Donbass, Crimea, and Russia in the immediate aftermath of the years to come? What do you think to be the goal of a Russian invasion of Ukraine? Like, let's say in a case that the war was not started, and what is like the final effect of Crimea and Donbass? Because this question is from a Russian viewer from Kabardino-Balkaria. Like, I think that the to be more precise, it's what it's complaining so much the Russian strategist. It's like Crimea, not Donbass. So because what do you think? Is it possible for you that that technically Ukraine will be able to retake back Crimea or not?
I don't.
Or Iryna, let me make a better question. If, let's say, there is a peace treaty with Ukraine completely, let's say, in peace, but without Crimea, it's acceptable for the Ukrainians or no?
Now? No.
And before February 24?
Before February, as I've said, some people were discussing federalization, and some people in society, if we look at polls before February 24th of February, some people were endorsing this idea that maybe we would have peace if we don't fight too much for Donbass, for the parts of Donbass and Crimea. But in the end, like as a human rights defender, because like I have a human rights background, I was not advocating. I was not supporting this because we had huge human rights violations on on the territory of Crimea and in Donbass in particular too. We can speak about isolation for hours, but I think it's better to read Stanislav Aseyev's book, or we can speak about human rights abuse in Crimea in terms of abductions of Crimean Tatars and numerous political prisoners, both in Kremlin and in Crimea. People were just people losing properties. I personally talked to a lot of Crimean Tatars who lost everything because Russia came and nationalized it. And it's the best case. It's a better case than to be abducted and killed. I mean, I personally don't see. I didn't see that as a compromise because I would not put up with the fact that our people would have to endure all this and to continue suffering just because other parts of Ukraine wanted peace. And as we've seen, and that's what I thought and other parts of active society thought, that would lead to bigger war, and it did.
Perfect, but only one curiosity, like the Crimean Tatars, that they were like, let's say, forced to go away. Now they are in Ukraine, or moved in other parts of Russia or whatever.
No, many of them are still in Crimea. I know I spoke to Crimean Tatars who left Crimea just before the invasion. I was working with NPR back then, and we did an interview with a family, like with an older couple that went to Kyiv in January, I think. And they were saying that they stayed in Crimea for a long time, but it's just impossible to live there for them because there's huge pressure and it's like constant danger. You constantly think that you or your family can be abducted. Their relatives are still staying there, but I think it also depends on your views, like if they feel themselves very attached to their identity, if they want to practice their religion, and if they feel themselves Ukrainians, and at the same time, because all of our minorities, they have double identity because Ukraine is like a political nation. It's suffocating for them to stay there. Like people who do not care about politics can stay, but at some point, if the rule of law doesn't work, it might touch them too. So some people still choose to endure this. Some have no choice because they have nowhere to go, and that's one of the reasons why many people do not leave from the frontline areas now. When we see like kids, I don't know, women living still in frontline cities like Bakhmut, and it's like illogical, but these people are afraid that they would be abandoned and would have no place to live. So it's just
There was Iryna this image that was in Telegram, but not in the mainstream media, but I saw this image. I don't know if you saw it, about this child in Bakhmut that was like eating chocolate
yeah.
in the street. It was like, I mean, it seems to be a scene really from the World War II. So
Yeah.
and it's like 60 years after. So I really hope that, especially for the people, because I think that what will be like, to finish with a provocation. It's like, I think that probably it's very sad, this war, because let's say deeply, let's say Russian and Ukrainians are very similar. And I'm not saying that it's the same type, but for sure Ukrainians are next to Russian than to Italians, for example, in like historic, in let's say in habits, cuisine, whatever. So it's like cousins, and for me it's like that Italy is going in war with Spain, let's say. And
Same.
Iryna,
We were always colonized by Russia, and we don't see them.
okay, no, but let's say not in this thing. I think about, let's say, the type of habits, the type of cuisine, the type. But
I disagree.
you disagree, okay? But you are more next to the Russian, but to Greek.
I disagree because we have a completely different values, completely different culture. They always tried to appropriate our culture and to present it as theirs, and say that we are like poor holes Ukrainians with no culture. But in fact, most of things that they present as theirs come from Ukraine. So
like Bosch.
like, not only
No, no, okay, but I mean, many, let's say, typical, let's say, dishes that are presented as Russian are Ukrainians
but let's
historically.
forget that Russia would not exist if not like it came from the territory of Ukraine, and
I know,
when
I know. No,
yeah,
but the thing that I wanted to say, it was all a perfection. It was like, but for me, it will be very sad because to, let's say, to fix this cut between like the two populations, I think it will take decades because this war cut it completely, let's say, all the ties between Russia and Ukraine, and I think especially between the people. And so it will be difficult to restart after the end of the war, however, any type of relationship. And because, however, there will be a neighbor, so it will be difficult to, also if you are, let's say, not in sympathy anymore, it's still in the backyard. So let's hope that for the population, this time of disaster will end soon. Also for the children that have to manage also the school in a wartime or whatever. We're still supporting as more as we can, but let's hope that the support will end for not needs. So let's see. Iryna, thank you for your time. Wait 1 second that I will close it. And for all the other viewers that saw the live after on YouTube, if you have any comments, any question, just put it in the stream. I will give any question that I will receive to Iryna, and we will have other 2 speeches in the next weeks planned, and I will update you on the community channel. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
see you.
Ciao.